Welcome to the IODSA podcast, where we explore governance in action. My name is Vas, I'm an executive at the IODSA. Today we are unpacking the Public Finance Management Act, not just as legislation, but as a living system that should enable accountability, performance, transparency, and ethical leadership in the public sector. I'm joined by Joe Lesejane, who's worked extensively with directors and boards in this space. He's an experienced non-executive director and also facilitator of governance training. Thanks, Joe, for joining us here today. I wanted to pick your brain on PFMA and specifically find out from you, what is PFMA and when did it actually come into existence and why?
Yeah, it's a very good question, Ves. PFMA came around 1999 to 2000. And if I recall, at that time, the minister was Trevor Manuel, Minister of Treasury, of Finance, and PFMA. The objectives then of PFMA, if you recall that we had this transition since 1994. New people were coming into this dispensation, and there was a need then to come up with controls with some governance processes in the public sector. And for that reason, PFMA then looked at issues of transparency, because we're talking public funds. Accountability was an issue, and then proper management of revenue, of expenditure, of liabilities. Those kind of issues were really key out of that. But another key issue, the aim or objective of PFMA, was service delivery. And it's quite strange that today service delivery is a bone of contention. People are complaining about it, but PFMA was really meant to provide services to the people, cost-effective, efficient management of finances, and then there was also performance management. How do we then manage the performance of the people to ensure that we deliver on the services? And again, what you then hear from structures like the Auditor General, performance management is a huge issue. So PFMA, I think it was meant to achieve very great things, but then I think we've been struggling, if I may put it that way, to ensure that those issues that I'm just mentioning are actually being achieved. If you hear Parliament complaining, they complain about those issues. The public complain about those issues and all that. Yeah, and that really was the aim. And the issue is then, how do we ensure that we can be able to achieve the original intent, which I think it was very right. It was the correct thing, but then the implementation is really where where we're struggling.
So if we talk about implementation, what are the gaps in implementation? Why do you think those gaps exist as well?
Yeah, I think the gaps, Ves, is that if you sum up the core pillars of PFMA, the one side is good corporate governance, and then the other side is sound financial management. And if you look at it, it makes sense. Corporate governance is an umbrella, and then sound financial management is a subset of that. But then what has happened out of this whole scenario is, who is driving that process? National Treasury has been driving PFMA. And who are we talking about? We're talking about a financial management setup. We're talking about accountants, treasury people, and all that. So obviously there will be bias towards sound financial management, and they forget about the very key issue, which is good corporate governance. So much as the Act talks about it, we're lacking that. And no wonder, you probably will ask me many other questions. That is really where the gap is. And then what is then the pressure? You have National Treasury trying to push this in this regard. And remember, their strategy then is that if you do not do the right things, we will hold money. If you listen at what has happened at the city of Joburg, when the Minister of Finance was raising concerns, he's saying, I will withhold the infrastructure grants until you get your governance right and your financial management right and all that. So that is the strategy then. If you don't do, we will withhold funds and all that, yeah. But then what then the minister is in a way indicating that the governance has not been right. And no wonder you find them chasing people, collection and all that, which I think is very, is late, is late. So the biggest gaps then is that we focus on the financing, but then we didn't focus on the governance, even if the Act talks about governance.
Wow, that's fascinating. Sure, that's quite a fascinating point you've made there. I like how you've summed it up there. You kind of like the financial management aspect is one, and they're not seeing it collectively with governance as well. The good governance in that side, and also withholding. It's almost like you get penalized now. You get withholding funds and infrastructure. So with that, how should boards go about PFMA in the public sector, and how should they navigate this complex environment? Because we have PFMA, we have King 5, we have all other legislations, even enabling acts, which may even undermine the PFMA. So how do boards go about this point of tension?
Yeah. There's, I think, a number of things that needs to be looked after structurally. Some couple of years back with the then CEO here at the IOD, we had a discussion about that, and we then came up as facilitators that the problem is actually at the top. The shareholder level, the ministerial level. These politicians we see on TV and all that, the legislators and all that, they do not understand PFMA and how it should be driven and how we should ensure things like accountability and all that. But then what they then do is that they will give instructions to boards and all these other things, and then you find that the boards are pressurized in doing certain things to please people at the top and not necessarily doing the right thing. So I'm then trying to identify or highlight to you that there is a disjuncture between what boards should be doing in a PFMA environment and what do they do, because the layer at the top is the one that is influencing them. And people then come in and they effectively just nursing their jobs and all that here. So that is where you had the flaw. The second flaw is that with that opening at the top, you had other stakeholders who started coming into these entities, and then they starting to influence and all that. But then what then resulted out of that is that the wrong people get appointed onto the boards. I mean, I've experienced that when I first came into, this environment that, I then realized that, I'm the highly qualified person here and all that, yeah. But then at the end, when you then start to point out that, but hang on, can we then relook at our board structure? And you're avoiding to say to people that, no, you shouldn't actually be here because you don't really understand. So I had to work with, chairpersons and say, look, this is the challenge that you are having, and this is what I'm suggesting we do. Let's then find a way of strengthening this board, and this is where the area of training then started to come in. Let's train the board on this area. The very PFMA, they must understand the roles and responsibilities at the committee level, they, should be understood, because the committees are not really functioning there. Now, what I've found in my history, because I came through the audit committee layer, I actually have been stretched. Very, very much, very stretched, because as the audit committee, you had to do quite a lot, and try and take the jobs of the other committees, because when the Auditor General comes as an external auditor, the first person they go is to the chair of the Audit Committee. And then I had to answer a whole lot of other questions. But then when you think of it, then I think, oh, but then the chair of the board should be answering this. But then it's too late. I mean, they can realize where the gaps are. So that is really the areas that needs to be focused, is the competence at board level. Who is sitting there? Let's get the right people. And I must say, over time, many boards have started to correct that. Many ministries have started to realize that. And what was happening, remember, we've been coming into this space, training. And then people then start to know, okay, this is what we should be doing. And then at committee level, that band actually has to come in. We also have been training executives. So what we were doing, we are bringing in competence along the way. So with that competence, then you can bring in other, issues like, how do we ensure that we have an ethical culture in this environment? Because now people understand their roles and responsibilities, and they're starting to appreciate governance. Now you can then start to talk to them about, let's talk about integrity. How do we ensure that there is proper integrity? How do we ensure that there is accountability? Management understands their role, what they should be reporting, and what sort of things we should be having and all that. And I must say, in some boards, I found that we won, in others we struggled. And all that, because now you're dealing with personalities and all those kind of matters and all that. But then again, it keeps the adrenaline, and you just keep going and finding different ways of fighting this challenge and all that. Yeah, and I think it can be done, but then it should be fixed right at the top.
And that's the shareholder.
That is the shareholder level. That is, and Ves, I have worked with very good ministers, and then you go in there as the chair, some of them the chair of the board, and I say, look, minister, this is what we're dealing with, and then this is what I'm here to recommend to you, so that we strengthen this board and ensure that the very things that are in PFMA, there is effective accountability, sound financial management, governance is very strong, and all that. And some they really have liked that and say, yeah, I will work with you. This is what you should be doing and all that. And but then others, you get told that, listen, this is my territory.
And that's like a political game now.
Yeah, playing. That's right. Yeah. So I either think, the door, or I'm going to stick with this, yes. And you have to find different ways. You cannot just abandon your job and then walk away. You have to find different techniques and work with people and all that. Because at the end of the day, is the organization, are the stakeholders that we are dealing with that we need to be concerned about, not particular individuals here.
Joe, you've spoken a little bit about consequence management when we refer to withholding the infrastructure. So is there inherent risk that directors take on the moment they step into a board in the public sector that's governed by PFMA because of all these tensions that you've mentioned? And if there are these risks or tensions, how does one navigate that on an individual level now? Because you have the board, they want to go in one direction. Maybe you have a minority view, a dissenting view. What is the risk that this brings to directors and the board collectively?
Yeah, I think, and I've been asked that question many times. And the reason is because people then start to realize that if I get into this space, it's my reputation at stake. There could be legal consequences, because PFMA is very, very clear about those consequences, the legal side. and all that. But remember, Ves, what has happened, and this has been a transition. When PFMA came, for a number of years, people were protected in this environment because the people at the top were your politicians. So if I get appointed into that space because I am their person, then I enjoy that protection. So even if I mess up, then there is this protection. But over the years, the environment has started to change, and people were poking into this area. Accountability. People must report. Where are the ethics and all that? So questioning a lot of things. So that veil was then started, to be opened and all that, and people started to be exposed. Now, for the first time, we started to see. And after a number of years, we started to see people being prosecuted. We started to see things like delinquency, people, challenged as delinquent, directors and all that. And then, the eyes of people were starting to open. Oh, we thought it was in the private sector, now in the public sector. Now they started to understand that the core is actually the fiduciary duties. They are the same, whether private or public sector, because they used to say, no, you here with the King Code, no, it's private sector, go away and all that. But then now they realize that, I'm talking about your own environment because I'm quoting the very PFMA. And then that is really how you find that even from the training side, we're doing a lot of training because people started, to see that, And for that reason, it's always important that when I get into that space, I understand that the responsibilities are still the same, whether private or public sector. I still have the same fiduciary responsibilities, and then the legal consequences are exactly the same. I could be prosecuted. And PFMA and Treasury regulations actually state very clearly there could be a jail sentence, there could be a fine, and all that. But then there's, that question that you're raising is very, very important because remember we had the grey listing, and then after the grey listing, there have been a lot of things that government had to do. One of the things that they started to do is to get these laws to talk to each other. Now, you started to see that they are being pulled together and all that. And I think a lot of things are now being done behind the scenes by the Financial Intelligence Center. And I think you're going to see PFMA closely linked with the Companies Act because there are companies in the public sector. So they operate through the Companies Act and PFMA. So you're going to see all of those things started, being pulled together. And I think with that, people are now going to start to understand that, that comfort zone that we've been having is gone now. And with that, what as a result? Getting competent people into this space that is at board level, and then also the right governance structures, competent at management level, which is also an area where we found that it's been, a problem. And remember, you had lots of areas where people are coming in there. I get paid a lot of money, but then I'm not worthy, to be, in that space. You also see people being suspended and they stay for 3 years, they're getting a salary and they're doing nothing and all that. So I think when these laws are starting to be pulled together, you're going to see that lots of people are going to start to jump, and then people then would know that there's nowhere to run. If I want to stick to the PFMA environment, I have to apply even what is in the private sector, and then vice versa and all that. Because even in local government, you're seeing that all these things are now being pulled together. And I think it's a very good thing because overall the country is going to be strengthened from a governance perspective.
Joe, how should boards satisfy themselves that systems of financial and risk control are actually working? They can get reports. Reports could say good things. It could say that there's a bit of risk or no control. But if you're getting a polished report, how does the board actually go about pulling that apart?
Yeah. No, yeah. Thanks, Vas. That's very pertinent in this particular environment that we are, talking about. And if you look at the PFMA environment, that environment is specifically talking about the system of risk management and internal control. And that part you find in the PFMA 1, but then also when you then look at the detail of the PFMA and Treasury regulations, they talk about the system of risk management and internal control. And I think those are the core in terms of the foundations of of PFMA, and just to ensure that this environment is buttoned up. But then the issue that we then have noticed in this space, Ves, is that risk management in itself, it is a process at a management level. And what we should be talking about is a risk governance process. And remember, the two separate layers. So there's the risk governance at board level, which is what we're not talking about in PFMA. Remember, earlier on I mentioned that the aim here is to ensure that there is sound corporate governance. So it goes back to there that this part is lacking. And then there is risk management at management level. So you have two layers now that we need then to be thinking about. But the issue that you're now finding in this space is that we then need to ensure that the governance from a risk perspective is set up. So meaning that you have a board that is driving the risk governance processes, and then risk governance at committee level, and then management in this space. They have a risk management process now, and for instance, a risk management committee at this level, and then also at the management level, meaning that the different departments and all that. So that is actually the responsibility then of the board to ensure that that layer is overseen correctly. But then on the other side, remember that whilst we're talking about risk management and then the oversight being the risk governance, there's also the other side, there's internal controls. And who should be doing internal controls is actually, again, that management level. So what you then are starting to find with that question is, how do we ensure that that system of risk management and internal control is effective? And where is this system being effective? So meaning that, again, we need to go back and ensure that there's sound corporate governance where we are overseeing the risk management and the internal control. But then these are happening at management level. What you find in a PFMA setup, and again, another gap, very, very glaring gap, who should be overseeing the two is the Audit Committee. Now, the question would be, if it's the Audit Committee, where is risk management and internal control, happening? It's actually in all the other committees, not necessarily the Audit Committee. So if you'd go and look at your remuneration committee, and that remuneration committee, this is where you have your human capital risk or human resources risk. They are actually in that part. But then you then have a link to some other committee. So how do you ensure, or which committees rather, should actually be coming together and overseeing the issue of risk? But then if you look at internal controls, there's the Audit Committee, but which other committee? So what I'm then trying to point out is that what you find in the PFMA environment, again, the gap of who should be overseeing these areas and then reporting to the board, you find that the audit committee is the only committee. So that's an area where you find that somebody is driving things, but then other people are supposed to be doing that. And again, you find these gaps, who should be driving the process. And again, what I'm trying to point out is there is a glaring gap where the audit committee is really the only committee that is driving many of the things that you find in that space, rather than being shared with other structures, other committees in the organization.
Joe, my last question for you is, if you were advising a newly appointed board in the public sector, what is the starting point for them? There's King 5, there's PFMA, they need to be inducted, they need to be aware of their fiduciary duties. It doesn't start and stop with PFMA, knowing the PFMA in and out.
Yeah.
What is your message to new boards?
Yeah, I think it's a very powerful question. Now, one of the things that we tell newly appointed board members, whether private sector or public sector, the first thing is that one should do a due diligence. So meaning that you have to then get to understand the environment that you are getting yourself into. What kind of organization is there? What governance structures are we seeing? Who sits in there? What sort of issues that you are going to be encountering? But very, very important, what sort of skills are required for me to be able to serve in that board? So meaning that, and just to give you an example, if I get into an IT environment, then the question I should be asking myself, to what extent am I comfortable with the IT environment? What sort of things am I going to have to learn, and all these, other, issues, and not just jump in. But I would then say that as a newly appointed, the first thing that you're going to have to study, not just read through, study, is the annual report. Because the annual report is really telling you a whole lot of things that are internal there. The annual report, you analyze the governance structures, but then in particular, what are the shortcomings? And you will see there, when you look at the board, how it's structured, the committees, how all those things are pulled together. You will actually start to tear that organization apart. And then there's certain reports that you get out of that annual report, from the committees themselves. What are they saying? What are the key things they're driving? But then you also you have to look at the Auditor General's report, because that will then tell you how governance is actually being run, financial management. You're looking for things like your audit qualifications, if there are any, because then they tell you that there's certain things to be able to fix and all sorts of things. Yeah, you look at the Audit Committee report, it will tell you a number of things. But I think what you're going to have to really dig into and make sure that you going to focus on. You're going to have to find out what is the culture in this organization, because culture is very important to drive all the things that we're talking about. And how do you get that? You have to talk to the chair of the board, the chairs of these committees, the other committees, but then talk to the CEO, talk to your risk management person, your internal audit person, and all that. So those people will actually give you a picture of what is going on. And with that, you're going to have to then have a list of where are the gaps, what needs to be fixed. But I would say, having got all of that, find a way of working together with the chair of the board, because what I'm trying to address here is the tone at the top, the ethical culture, because if that is not done correctly, you're going to find that everything else, we're just fighting fires, and you don't want to be fighting, fires. You want to start at the top, and then the other issue that I would say you're going to have to learn very, very quickly when you come into that space is to have courage. And I had to learn, to do that because the first thing, you find that there are all these external forces, and then suddenly I found myself new into this organization, and the chair of the board says, as the chair of the audit committee, by the way, we've got an annual report. There are these issues. We're going to have to go to parliament. Now I'm new. Now you have to go and face politicians and all that. Now this is where the issue of reputation that I've spoken about came in. Now I had to learn very quickly that, okay, now these are the things. My name is there. I'm going to have to do quite a lot. And for that reason, I had to be very meticulous and all that. Talk to people and all that, and make sure that you stare and cause fire if need be, so that the environment gets right and all that. And that in itself was very daunting. But I think looking back and some of the environments, when you go back and train there, it's, oh yeah, by the way, there's some difference that I've made in there and all that. It's not easy environment because you actually changing people. It's a change management process, and you're going to win quickly. And other areas it takes a bit time. And for that reason, whilst you then look at that PFMA and look at it deeply, it's not a complicated act. It's absolutely not. I would say it's much easier than the Companies Act. But because of all these external things that come into that environment, it's made a very, very huge matter. Things like, for instance, fruitless and wasteful expenditure. It sounds like a very, very terrible issue. So these are the things that I would then do, because what you find in a PFMA is water here, which you can get for 10 rands at a supermarket. But because we must go on tender, somebody comes in at 50 rands, and then it happens to be the cheapest, and then we take that. So things I had to question, that 50 rands and then 10 rands at the supermarket. What is logical here? Okay? So meaning that the difference to me, that's where there's fruitless and wasteful expenditure. So you have to have the courage to be unpopular and all that. And in some places, people then started to realize, oh yeah, no, he's making sense. Others said, no. We ran through this tender process, we've done and all that. But then we spend so many millions instead of spending lesser. Is it right? So I'm saying that you have to question. You have to have the courage to question people and all that. And I used to have a saying in one of the public entities that I'd rather be fired for doing the right things rather than being incompetent and all that. And over time, people realize that, oh yeah, no, he means it and all that, yeah. Because I would then go and say, no, I refuse. I simply refuse something. I'm not going to accept it, not under my watch and all that. So that is the tone that you must have. But obviously, you must work with people, in that environment. And it does work best because what you see in that environment, there is more acceptance of the King Code coming in. Many organizations are willingly taking the King Code and all that, and they really want. That's the one thing. You also see a lot of them starting having got the Social and Ethics Committee, even if they're not required, because they're starting to appreciate this is the value that we can be able to get. So these are some of the things that I think through the IOD we had started to change, and people appreciate, and you're starting to see the environment changing quite a lot. And I think we're moving in the right direction. Though some areas might be slow, but then we're hitting the right places.
Joe, thanks so much for your time. That was extremely insightful. I think that I've taken away a lot in this conversation. the accountability, the risk that we've spoken about, the tensions, how to govern risk, all these external influences in the public sector. But there's also this light at the end of the tunnel that you're speaking about, and how we're making a difference through our training, through our board evaluations, through our advisory work as well. Thank you for your time. It's been great.
Okay. You're welcome. Thanks, Wes. Thanks for the opportunity. Thanks.
Thank you for joining us for this conversation with Joe Lesejane. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to our channel to receive alerts about future conversations. For those of you that want to attend our course, Director's Guide to the PFMA, head over to our website at www.iodsa.co.za and visit our training page.